Hi guys, in today's how-to video, we're gonna look at the main differences between IPSC and USPSA, specifically for the handgun division. The objective of this presentation is not to do an in-depth review of all ins and outs of the IPSC and USPSA rules, but to give a pragmatic and practical overview of the most important differences. From reading different posts on groups and forums and social media and watching YouTubers on YouTube, I oftentimes get the impression that especially USPSA shooters think that USPSA is a completely autonomous, independent, by itself standing organization, which is not fully correct. USPSA is part of the overlying IPSC and actually is part of one of the IPSC zones. Like you have the Russian Federation, you have USPSA, you have a whole bunch of others. And specifically for me, for example, the federation that manages everything dealing with IPSC in Belgium is called the Belgian Parcours Shooting Association. In the world, the Russian Federation is actually the largest, followed then by USPSA, which is the second largest. So IPSC can be divided up in zones and in different regions, of which USPSA is one of the regions, the second largest. If you want to find out more about the IPSC regions, I refer you to this website underneath on this slide. In IPSC and USPSA, we cannot go around the rulebooks, specifically for this presentation discussing the handgun divisions. In IPSC, we have the handgun competition rules, which you can find on the website, the IPSC website indicated below. If you want to have a high-level briefing, go to the Wikipedia website. Same thing is applicable to USPSA. Their competition rules you can actually find on their website, and high-level briefing can be found on Wikipedia. The last updates for IPSC were in January 2019, and USPSA actually much more recent in March 21. And from reading different posts on social media, forums and blogs, I understand that there are a lot of people that are very, very unhappy with the changes that were made, and I would say an equal amount of people that are very happy with the changes. I don't have a particular opinion in it because I'm not a USPSA shooter and I have to comply to the IPSC rules as they stand. I can already begin with the end in mind and clearly say that both organizations are directly tied to each other, as I indicated in my previous slide, but the rulebooks are not the same. Again, the purpose of this video is not to go over article by article to see what the differences are, but just to go over the main differences from a practical point of view. I wanted to start with the classification system, whereby you have the lowest level, which is a D-level shooter, and then the highest level, a Grandmaster shooter, and with the rise in level, the number of people that actually have that level actually decrease. In IPSC, this actually exists, meaning if you would go, for example, to the IPSC website, there's a tab and a section that discusses the IPSC classification system. But honestly, in all the years that I've been active in different divisions in IPSC, this is not really broadly known. Before I actually looked at the website, I was unaware that it was really applicable in IPSC, and it's not intensively used in either level 1, 2, or 3 matches. There's also a very limited number of classifiers that you can actually find on the IPSC website. USPSA, on the contrary, I think most USPSA shooters are very familiar with the classification system and also in which category, which level they actually have. So it's intensively used contrary to IPSC. And if you go to the USPSA website, there are huge numbers of classifiers, different types, that you can actually find on their website. So you see that the classification system is much more and better used and adopted in USPSA than in IPSC, which I do regret a little bit, because I think it's good to have a standardized system that is actually used, contrary to IPSC, in which you can see what your actual level is, and you can also, for example, during matches, compare yourself with somebody that has the same level. Also in preparation of your stage planning, for example, and determining your stage strategy, that might be very interesting. And also have a clear idea and view on where you want to go next, where your ambition lies. So I think there's a lot of room for IPSC to improve and optimize the already existing system and to use it in a much more practical way, as they actually do in USPSA. Now let us take a look at the different handgun division and the similarities and particularly the differences between them. In IPSC and USPSA, I refer to the rule books to find out more information if you're interested in it. Both IPSC and USPSA have open. Both IPSC and USPSA have a limited division, but in IPSC, limited is actually called standard. We do not have a limited 10 division in IPSC. Single stack in IPSC is actually called classic. We both have production. We also have carry optics, but there too, production or carry optics is actually called production optics in IPSC, and we also have revolver. So a lot of similarities and a couple of differences, and you'll also see throughout the presentation that per division there are also minor to larger differences between them, except for different names. A quick sidestep from the divisions. I wanted also to touch on the gun measuring boxes, because I think that's one of the important differences between IPSC and USPSA. This in IPSC is a gun measuring box with the dimensions listed underneath the picture on the slide. I'm not going to go over the different dimensions in millimeters, but in USPSA you also have a gun measuring box, but you can clearly see that the dimensions are different from the IPSC gun measuring box. So especially if you travel abroad for matches, this is something to consider and to be aware of, that the dimensions of the gun measuring boxes of IPSC are not identical to the gun measuring box and the dimensions thereof in USPSA. Another quick sidestep discussing ammo, and ammo specifically related to the open division. In IPSC, the weight of the bullet used in the round needs to be equal or higher than 120 grains. In USPSA, the weight of the bullet needs to be equal or higher than 112 grains. You can see that the weight of the bullet is not the same in specifically open major division. So what do the rulebooks say about the power factor? And I guess by now that you understand that it's not going to be the same. And if you do or did, you are correct. For minor category, both in IPSC and USPSA, the power factor needs to be equal or higher than 125 power factor. It's a little more complicated in major category. For USPSA, it needs to be equal or higher than 165 for all divisions. In IPSC, for example, if you shoot open major, it needs to be equal or higher than 160 power factor. On the other hand, if you shoot classic major or standard major, it needs to be equal or higher than 170 power factor. A very quick sidestep, and also to be very clear, my personal opinion, I'm more in favor of a standardized system applicable for all divisions and not have these differences in the major divisions that you're shooting at. And whilst you're at it, why not reduce the power factor for major divisions to somewhere between 150 and 160 instead of 160 and plus 65 or even 170, just to reduce the wear and tear on these major guns. But again, it's my personal opinion. So what do the rulebooks say about competition rigs? In IPSC, it obviously depends on the division you're shooting in. For open, it's freestyle as far as placement of the holster, the pouches, the magnets, and so forth. In production and standard classic revolver, the hip bone rule actually applies. And for example, in production, you can actually use a race gun type holster. In USPSA, that's one of the rules that actually changed in the latest modification on the competition rules. They allowed the placement of magnets. You can actually shift around your pouches and holsters, so it's a more equal level playing field. In certain divisions such as production, for example, contrary to IPSC, the race gun type holsters are not allowed, and also contrary to IPSC, you can actually attach functional lights on your handgun, which is not allowed in IPSC. What is still applicable for both IPSC and USPSA are the dimensions and the measurements between your gun and your belt, your pouches and your belt, and so forth and so forth. So that's still applicable regardless of where you actually put your pouches, magnets, or holsters. I also wanted to touch on the mag size and capacity per division. In IPSC for open, the mag size is actually limited to 170 millimeters. A standard gun needs to fit into a box, hence why you also see standard shooters actually file off parts of their mag wells, for example, and they thumb rest to make sure that it actually fits. In production, it also needs to fit in a box, and the total number of rounds in a mag used on the stages is limited to 15. Production optics, same thing, total number of rounds is limited to 15. In USPSA, the size of the mag in an open gun is slightly larger than in IPSC. In limited, it doesn't need to fit into a box, but the size of the mags are limited. And for production, it also needs to fit into the box, but contrary to IPSC, the total number of rounds used per mag on a stage is limited to 10. And in carry optics, there's also a limit on the size of the mags that are used. So this is, for example, a USPSA mag gauge, which is different from an IPSC mag gauge, and that's particularly applicable and noticeable if you shoot in open. I personally had an experience where I have an STI DVC open that was delivered with USPSA compliant big stick mags, and I actually had to file off a little more than a millimeter so that my mags actually fit into the IPSC compliant mag gauge. So something to pay attention to. So what about the type of courses that are used in IPSC and USPSA? For short course, it's the same. The total number of rounds per stage is equal or smaller than 12. It's the same in IPSC and USPSA. There's a difference in scoring hits per shooting location, 9 in IPSC, 8 in USPSA. And there's an additional rule that you cannot have more than 2 shooting locations on a USPSA short course. Medium course, there's a noticeable difference in total number of rounds per stage. It's equal or smaller than 24 in IPSC, equal and or smaller than 20 in USPSA, so a difference of 4. And again, a difference in scoring hits per shooting location, 9 IPSC, 8 in USPSA, and the additional rule of a maximum of 3 shooting locations for a medium course. Long courses, maximum in both is 32, and again the difference in scoring hits per shooting location, 9 in IPSC, 8 in USPSA. Now, when I read different fora, blogs, social media posts, and so forth, I noticed that especially USPSA shooters think that IPSC is actually more linked to IDPA than with USPSA, which is not correct, because IPSC is certainly not tactical and defensive like, for example, IDPA, and it's directly related to USPSA. So the IPSC and USPSA courses are very, very comparable to each other. I do and I did observe two differences from watching YouTubers post their videos from all over the world, including USPSA and IPSC, is I do think that IPSC stages are just slightly more technical, tighter corners, a more difficult placement of targets, the sizes of targets that are being used, and so forth. And on the other hand, the targets are placed at further distances in USPSA when compared to IPSC, and that is primarily due to the types and the sizes of the ranges, comparing ranges in the US with, for example, Belgium. I mean, we can only dream of having ranges like you have in the US. And that is due to very strict and severe laws and regulations pertaining to shooting ranges, which are relatively small here in Belgium, for example. Talking about the stages, I was wondering whether or not there are differences between IPSC and USPSA as far as stages per type of match was concerned are applicable. And as you can guess, yes, there are differences not only in the number of stages, but also the type of stages that are used on these types of matches. So again, I'm not going to go over all the different numbers, but you can clearly see that also here it's not the same between IPSC and USPSA. Let us take a quick look at the cardboard targets used in IPSC and USPSA. In IPSC, we only have one type of cardboard target, and that is the very known classic IPSC target, which comes in 100%, 60% and mini target version that can be used on training and match stages. In USPSA, you have the luxury of either choosing the torso target or the classic target, and with the different sizes as well. Except for USPSA region, I've not seen any videos where shooters actually use or shoot at the torso target. I cannot speak for all regions or countries, but for example, in Belgium, shooting at human-like silhouettes is forbidden by law. So even if we wanted legally, we cannot shoot at these types of targets. For steel targets, poppers and plates, I also refer you to the dimensions that are clearly listed on the pages indicated here in the rule books. But there's also one difference. There are no USPSA steel targets that we can shoot at. So you also have more options to shoot at, talking about steels when compared to IPSC. When I was watching USPSA Nationals 2020, I noticed that multiple shooters were actually taking side pictures when they were called online, and not only on one target, but on multiple targets. So that made me look at the IPSC and USPSA rules to see what the rules actually said. And mind you, also there are differences between IPSC and USPSA. In IPSC, it's an absolute no-no to take one or more side pictures when you are called online. The best you can do is actually take out your gun without a magazine inserted, point it in front of you downwards in front of your feet to activate the red dot and check the red dot, but you cannot take a side picture or one or more targets. In USPSA, you can actually take a side picture when you are called online and you are on the starting position. You cannot take more than one step. The gun also needs to be unloaded, and there's no problem of taking side pictures on multiple targets when you're online. So there's already another big difference between IPSC and USPSA. Something else that caught my eye when I was watching USPSA Nationals 2020 videos was that on several stages, people were cutting corners on the stage, which drew my attention and also prompted me to look at the rule books of IPSC and USPSA. In IPSC, again, also an absolute no-no. We can never, for any reason or circumstance, cut corners on stages, regardless of their size, regardless of the efficiency of it. We can never do it. We always have to stay within the clearly identified and marked demarcated area. We can never take shortcuts. In USPSA, I learned that you can actually take shortcuts and cut corners unless it's clearly stipulated in the written stage briefing. So if it's not clearly written in the written stage briefing, you can actually cut corners if you think that it helps you and optimize your stage time. So again, another difference between IPSC and USPSA. A quick word on match scoring systems. In IPSC, they actually promote Windows match scoring system. In USPSA, they promote practice score. Although I have to say that also in a lot of matches that I shoot at or in certain trainings that I participated in, practice score is also used. And once in a while, I also saw the program Shouldn't Score It that was used. So again, another minor difference between IPSC and USPSA. In conclusion, I could say that IPSC and USPSA are both fruit and actually are both apples, but USPSA is a red apple and IPSC is a green apple. So they are both apples, but you can clearly see differences in form, in taste, in size, and so forth. So there are a lot of similarities, but IPSC and USPSA are not 100% the same. Therefore, I would strongly recommend, especially if you train and or shoot matches abroad, before you start to make your travel plans, check with your relative federation the specific and applicable region and country laws, rules and regulations to prevent any issues when you arrive in country and on site to train or shoot your matches. Country, for example, I already talked about Belgium multiple times, but I recently heard that the gun laws and regulations in Australia are very, very strict, also as they pertain to IPSC. For example, the round count in all magazines, if I was not mistaken, is always limited to 10. Even if you shoot open, for example, you cannot have more than 10 rounds in your magazines. So check before you make your travel arrangements to avoid any problems that you might encounter in country in that particular region. Something I'm wondering of is we discussed a whole bunch of differences between IPSC and USPSA, but what I was not able to find out or learn is when and where and why did these changes come out of. I mean, why does the US use modified IPSC rules and why does the rest of the world use the standard IPSC rules and regulations? So please comment in the comment section below if you have any ideas or information on it. That would be of great interest to me. And above all, I would say remember to have fun regardless of whether you or not you are shooting IPSC or USPSA or any other practical shooting sport for that matter, and DVC.